Welcome to Full Prefrontal, the show that exposes the mysteries of executive functions. This show is a collection of conversations about the role of the prefrontal cortex, which impacts your focus, planning, problem-solving, emotional balance, and independence. These conversations will introduce mental tools that will empower you to shift your mindset for a successful life. And now, here's your host, Sucheta Kamath.
All right, welcome back to Full Prefrontal. We are exposing the mysteries of executive function. I am here, as always, with our host, Sucheta Kamath. Good morning, Sucheta. Always good to be with you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Kick us off, please.
Good morning, and great to be with you, Todd, as always. And today, I wanted to talk about the mirage of engaged classrooms. On a recent trip to India, I had a chance to visit a few schools, particularly in Chennai and Pune. And I was met with these amazing teachers and administrations with great enthusiasm. The classrooms were extremely neat and tidy. The kids were impeccably dressed, and they were sitting perfectly still. And the teacher spent a lot of her time at the board, and kids worked on completing their work in complete silence. On the other hand, last 17 years also had a chance to observe classrooms in the United States. And I have visited and observed many students that I work with and done professional development. And the children often are seen to be working in groups. There's a lot of movement, sometimes even chaos. Teachers are still at the board, but much in lesser quantity. And there's a lot of distractions in the classroom. And still there's always, those who need help are in the front of the class, who seem to be doing well are in the back of the class. But generally, not all classrooms really look engaged. So my question is, what do engaged classrooms look like? And what's the happy medium? And that's why we have a very special guest who's going to shed some light on this. She specializes in interventions and strategies that are firmly supported by current neuroscience research. And she believes that by understanding brain's most effective processing, one can successfully apply these strategies in the classroom so that kids learn to work smarter, not harder. And so it's my great delight to invite and welcome Dr. Judy Willis. She has combined her 15 years as a board-certified practicing neurologist with 10 subsequent years as a classroom teacher to become a leading authority in the neuroscience of learning. I have heard her speak myself. She's a very impressive speaker, very engaging speaker, I must say. She is a prolific writer. She has written 9 books and more than 100 articles. I will be including some of them at the end of the show notes here. And all her work basically focuses on applying neuroscience research to classroom teaching. She is currently serving as an adjunct of faculty at the Williams College. She travels all over the world, giving presentations, workshops, consulting, and of course, I don't know how, but she does find time to write more for all of us. And in a recent interview, she was selected by Utopia to be the big thinker on education. So it's my great delight to welcome Judy. Judy, so happy to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Cheta. What a pleasure to be here with you. I enjoy your podcast.
Thank you very much. So I have been asking all my guests this question. Can you start us off with your own executive function skills and how are they? And then second question I have is, when did you discover learning to learn process for yourself in your journey of becoming a successful student?
I think I feel that my story for my motivation to a goal is what drove me to work on things that I didn't know at the time are executive functions. And I think that's the key to motivation and sustained effort, even when there are setbacks for anybody. But when I was quite young, I was very compelled to become a doctor, physician, as early as second grade, when quite some time ago. So I remember coming home and telling my mom, I decided I want to be a teacher when I grow up. And she said, "Oh, that's great. What have you considered being a doctor?" And I said, "Mom, girls aren't doctors, they're nurses." And indeed, that was the thought. And she said, no, really, girls can be doctors too. And as I processed that, within a couple of years after second grade, I knew I wanted to be a physician. And I worked hard at academics. I liked the feedback of making progress, whether it was reading or math. And so I studied more and I put more effort into it. I had the long-term goal in mind, which is pretty nice for executive functions to be motivated by. And with the goal in mind, I wanted to know what would help me get there. So I just kept progressing, getting feedback, and getting that dopamine reward for achieving challenges.
I love that
pleasurable.
story. Yes, I love this idea that you talk about, that your motivation to goal was your natural talent and ability, and it got further nurtured by this feedback that you received, which you realized that, oh, when I'm on the right track, the feedback is minimal probably, and when you're veering away from the right track. And so I see that self-correcting element to your own understanding of self. So you were a practicing neurologist when you decided to switch your career. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. I was practicing neurologist, and after about the first 10 years, my people being referred to me started being many more children, school children, and mostly the referrals were coming from the schools. And the complaints were the same that I'd see to a certain degree over the previous 10 years. Maybe they have Tourette's syndrome because they have outbursts. Maybe they have petit mal epilepsy because they seem to stare and maybe blink. So before that time, for the first 10 years, the kids coming for those observations, they were coming from not just teachers, parents and other people. So there was a certain percentage that had the condition and some that didn't. But then by the later years of my practice, there were so many more kids being referred to me from classroom teachers, particularly, who said, yeah, they're just staring and blinking, or they're making outbursts. Maybe they have Tourette's, maybe they have petit mal. And teachers were the same teachers who had taught my daughters. So I knew them, and I said, well, why is this happening? Because I evaluate these kids and they don't have it. And so we decided I'd come watch. And when I came to watch, the situation sounded a lot like you described the schools in India versus the U.S. Those kids were no longer sitting in groups. They were no longer collaborating. They were no longer doing the projects. They weren't even getting to brew beans in the window or hatch chicks in an incubator. So they were now sitting, taking information down, even in first grade, and doing drills. And there was no glitter on the floor. So I put together what was happening in my practice. And the teachers explained this was happening to them because they were now curriculum driven. They were now mandated what they had to cover in a year and were responsible for covering. And it was way excessive. It would have, even the Department of Education analysis group said it would take a year and a half at least to cover the curriculum they were given to cover in 9 months. So it was coming together. These kids were so stressed out that their normal brain response was taking over, which, like animals in the wild, fight, flight, freeze. They were so oppressed by the stress of boredom or frustration that they were doing their fight, flight, freeze, acting out or zoning out. So for the most case, the hyperactivity or the outburst or the disruptive kid and the kids who were zoning out and blinking were doing it because their brain was under the stress state of boredom or frustration. And that's why I felt if I went into neuroscience, took my neurology into the classroom, I know a lot about memory, so I could get the kids to memorize whatever they had to in less time, I thought. And I thought that I could use what I know about stress and emotion, but I wasn't exactly sure how it would come in a classroom. So instead of just saying, okay, I'm a neuroscientist, neurologist, I can tell teachers what to do, I said, no, that's totally not my approach. So I went back to school, got my teaching credential and master's of education, and then taught for 10 years, 5 years primary, 5 years secondary. And that's when I tried to apply the things that I thought were neurological to teaching. And things that worked, I'd write about in articles and gradually into books and presentations.
Yes, and I think that was such a gift because I think you brought clinical work certainly informs the way we do diagnostics. And when educators are working with children, of course, they do not feel comfortable or neither do they have any training. But somehow how they have this group in front of them, and certainly not homogenous, and you have to kind of teach that group to sort of be on the trajectory of following the same goal. And that goal may be invisible, or maybe the teachers are not making it visible enough. So before we jump into the actual process of helping students achieve more, can you give a little bit of a bird's eye view on this understanding that we have about executive function? our own understanding in the field has changed radically. What we considered, children being self-disciplined was something we expected. Rather, now we understand that it's a skill that matures over time. How do you see that developmental trajectory influencing the way we understand the brain as well as understand executive function?
You described it very well, and I know it's one of your specialties that you've had an impact on as well. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
I feel that executive functions are terrific and important, and they do develop along their own trajectory. And these neural networks in the prefrontal cortex undergo their greatest growth spurt, their greatest responsiveness to activation during the school years. So here they are. They're going to grow and develop. And even as recently as past month, some of the neuroscience research has hit the mainstream with reports in the social regular media that the prefrontal cortex executive functions are continuing to mature. They haven't yet reached their developmental peak through the 30s or well into the 30s. And as the history of our education for the executive functions were that they kind of grew and developed during childhood, and that kids should be able to organize and prioritize and make good decisions by the time they were in junior high, certainly high school, or when they were driving cars. So as we've done more research about following the changes that happen in any part of the cortex when it's going through maturation, the increased density of synapses, pruning away of circuits that weren't used, and most importantly, the increased myelin connecting the neurons in the circuits that were used. So as we talk about the development of executive functions through childhood now into the 30s, we see that kids are not, their brains are not just junior adults. Their brains are very dynamic and responding. Executive functions, especially around during the school years, they're responding to their conditions, to what experience they have, to what opportunities they have, and they're very malleable. The neuroplasticity, which as a circuit is used, it gets stronger. The firing of communication from neuron to neuron produces a response that increases the wiring among those neurons. More of this myelin that coats the axon and lets information travel faster, more of these dendrite connections. And as these more dendrites come and more myelin comes and synapses, the structure of these functions, as part of the circuits in the brain, becomes so well structured. They're so strong. They've got so much coding and connections that they become more and more automatic and the go-to network in the brain. But until that happens by using the circuits and through their natural development, they're erratic. It's like frayed wiring. These executive functions cannot be called on voluntarily all the time, and they'll vary in how well they work from day to day. And the more opportunities we have to provide the environment, the challenges, the experiences that let the brain build these, the more successful and faster they can become at the younger age. Because, okay, great. So their brains will be ready when they're 30, but they're driving cars and making decisions that affect their health and life and drugs and alcohol and dating when they're halfway to their 30s. So we need to understand that their executive functions are not up to the challenge now, as opposed to 20 years ago, because suddenly 20 years ago, the internet became a big demand on executive functions. Think about
Yes.
it. When there's social media and it's so accessible and World Wide Web, how are you going to use what you don't have, like long-term goal, delay of long-term goals, when your brain is programmed for immediate gratification? So they have the higher challenge of school, where there's so much more curriculum demanded for them to memorize or learn. And they have the big demand on their self-management because, oh my goodness, such wonderful things are available to them with a click.
Yeah, and I think the whole notion that these skills were supposed to be present and then used, and somebody who doesn't have these skills showing, or they're not present in their behavior or their education, then they were somehow lacking. I think I like that we have moved more towards the compassionate attitude towards those children, all the children, and particularly those who struggle. So from the feet on the ground perspective, do you believe the educators have been given adequate tools and knowledge to keep up with this dynamic insight we have into brain's prefrontal system?
it's so that's one of the reasons I'm glad I went through the system of going to grad school and getting my credential at a University of California. So it's very high academic, but there are also regulations and tests that teachers need to take and certifications. So it was the best of all possible learning experiences. There were only 40 of us. We sat at round tables. There were discussions, projects. Yet when it came to how much they could embed in the curriculum and still keep it so engaging and valuable and memorable, there was a lot they couldn't include. And so being there, I saw that. So that they would love to teach more neuroscience of learning, but they show me, and I've been there, where can we fit it in? So that's a significant problem. And I really can't say there's no day in class where I felt that what I was learning wasn't helpful or useful. So somehow there needs to be, ideally, opportunities with paid for teachers to have more instead of less professional development when they're in the field and in classrooms, and same for administrators, so that they can, among other things, just have the foundational knowledge of neuroscience that they could really build in even a half day and then build up on within their professional learning communities. But if they could have the opportunity to learn about neuroplasticity, the limitless potential of a person to build the brain they want by activating the circuits that they want to be stronger. I would have them learn about the amygdala, how during that stress state we mentioned, the normal behavior, a healthy brain becomes a survival mechanism. So fight, flight, freeze, or in the classroom, act out, zone out. And the third one being that because of changeability of the brain and neuroplasticity and what we now know of as the executive functions with things like mindfulness, being able to, even in a younger person, tell the lower brain, the stress brain, the amygdala, recognize that there was stress building and then keep access open before the stress takes over by lowering the stress through things that kids have learned: mindfulness, breathing, visualizations. So those are three things that students' brains, they're not bad, they're not lazy, they're not unsmart, they're not belligerent or in any way trying to be bad when they act out or zone out. It's their brains doing what they're programmed to do for survival. And they need to know that. And if the teachers know it and understand it, think of all the second chances there'll be. So teachers are really smart. They really want to know, but funds in many states are cut back for the number of days that they can have professional development for them to be able to go to it.
Yeah, and I think what I see is the education itself for teachers is centered around learning theories and pedagogy of delivering learning. But how students learn from the cognitive neuroscience is not part of their repertoire. And particularly how to make those who are not learning is also not part of their repertoire. So there's a little gap.
Oh, the schools of education, you're right. They do not provide this information. And it's not because they don't want to. The important thing is that the problem is not with schools, it's not with the administration, it's not with the teachers. It's with the non-educationally trained legislators who are evaluating the funding and influenced by book publishers and testing companies. The IB test, that's a for-profit company. So the influence and the fact that the people making these educational decisions in the legislature and the government don't have the background and are exposed to lobbyists, the people from the publishing and the testing companies. So that's where we need more educators to influence legislators.
Thank you for clarifying that. So let's get into the meat of it. So I know you speak quite prolifically on motivation. So can you help us understand that a little bit? And you often talk about the video game model, and you describe how the industry that video industry has gotten it right. They are incredibly effective in engaging the gamer, letting him feel challenged and constantly in a state of wanting to level up. So tell us what that looks like in teaching and learning.
Okay, you've certainly explained it the way I understand it. The research done, people like I'll remember. In any case, the research done on people who already were, kids who were already avidly into video games. So it was to see, what is making them so engaged in these things that they don't eat meals, don't go to sleep, they just stay there. And as this group of people were evaluated, the components that seem to drive their sustained perseverance was that there was initially buy-in. They could tell you what the goal was of the game, and even though it was fantasy, they're going to save the world from a asteroid. Even though it was fantasy, they could tell you where they would get to after they leveled up 10 levels in the game. So there was goal buy-in. And, the fact that it could be fantasy is important to teachers or parents, because the kid, as long as they feel that there's some goal that's of interest to them, not you need to know this algebra so you can take calculus. That's very unappealing to a brain that's programmed for survival and for pleasure. The pleasure of this dopamine pleasure comes in the rest of the video game model, and you'll see how it works out in all of us. You'll see how your intrinsic motivation came from this video game model, which is the model of the dopamine circuit you have. So the first with the video game is they had buy-in. They could tell you what would happen if they achieved 10 levels of the game. Second part was they got to make predictions, second and third part, and work at their own level of achievable challenge, their own level of mastery. I mentioned earlier that it is stressful to kids in the classroom when one size fits all, when it's too easy and it's boring, or it has no relevance, so it's boring over and over, or when they get into the frustrated state of stress. So boredom activates the stress response, sustained repetitive boredom. So does sustained or repetitive frustration. The frustration on their part is to reach the goal. Maybe it's someone who gets all B's and their goal is to get an A in oral reports. Maybe it's somebody who just gets by on fractions or essays. So whatever the goal is that they are at school, sometimes there's no buy-in to it, but even in their video games, if the challenge to get to the goal was achievable and not boring, then the brain buys in, because the dopamine reward system works that certain experiences in all mammals will cause a release of this dopamine into the cover to circulate in the brain. And when it's released in this increased flash, one experiences deep satisfaction and pleasure, decreased stress, increased memory, increased motivation, and increased perseverance and effort. So here's a video gamer. The big pushes of dopamine release, there are smaller ones or good ones like listening to music or being read to, but two really big ones, making predictions, finding out how your prediction was, or achieving challenges. They're both very similar in a way. But so you can think of even your own experience when you've achieved the challenge you've set for yourself to go to the gym or to get to a certain distance in jogging, or to get so far in a language that you're learning, or to change your behavior pattern. When you set yourself a goal and you see progress, that keeps you on it, even a little progress. Sometimes if you don't see the progress, you may decrease the effort. But when you get back to seeing it again, that releases the dopamine. When the brain is aware that there's been some progress made toward the goal, the release of dopamine comes with it, coming that increased drive and motivation to persevere. So here's the video game model.
Can I interrupt you with two questions?
Sure.
As you described this, comes to mind is I think not a lot of people are describing, there's always this discussion about the amygdala and the stress response, the limbic system, the lower brain, and where we talk about stress response to something that challenges you. But I like that you're also framing it that boredom can lead to stress response. So it's a really critical thing to the listeners, because a lot of kids with ADHD, the parents as well as parents as well as educators will describe this bored child who is untamed or is not roped into education.
Good. Yeah.
And the
Good.
second thought, if you can maybe elaborate along the way, is you're not talking about entertaining children, you're talking about engaging them. And I think that's why sometimes I hear pushback when I present, rather the parents feel that the research is telling them to become these entertainers, or, I need to now become something I am not. And I always try to remind them that you're not entertaining kids, you're engaging them, right?
Right. And it is a responsibility, but it's far minimizing it to call it entertaining, engaging. So if you want motivation, which I agree, the motivation is the word we use. The experience the brain is doing, because it really isn't set up for long-term goals. I happened to really latch on to mine as a kid, but the brain is motivated by expectation of pleasure, which comes frequently with this dopamine, of achievement and progress and feedback progress is being made. So especially for kids who've never experienced that in a formal way, maybe they probably made progressive achievements when they were learning to ride a bicycle or keyboard or learn an instrument, but not with the feedback. See how you were last week? Well, listen to the recording of how you played it last month. What a difference, because their brains are so in the moment that they may not register that they have made progress with their effort. And even riding a bike, they interpret it because they don't know the neuroscience, right? They say, oh yeah, for a lot of days I didn't get it and then I did. So when parents and teachers especially see someone who is frustrated and acting out or zoning out because they don't feel they could achieve it, they've given up, that's the kid that needs to have an experience or several experiences of feedback of progress making en route to a goal. And it doesn't have to start as entertainment or education or edutainment. It's the experience with progress and feedback. It could be a parent who likes basketball, taking the child or shooting basketball hoops and helping the child make a graph of how many they got in, in the last 5 minutes of their practice with their parent, how many they got in that day, and they see on a graph. Yeah, it goes up and down, but whoa, yeah, over this month, I've gotten so much better. And then discussing, well, why did you get better? Now there's a graph. It says effort, time spent, and progress. So that begins to connect in their brains. And it's so empowering to have someone show you how your effort toward a goal progressed over time, rather than not knowing until the end or disassociating that you had anything to do with it, like bike riding. So whether it's academics or finding something they're interested in nature, names of flowers or dinosaurs or facts about the solar system, whatever they're interested in, it would be them to buy in, just like the video game. So if a parent wants to help a child build their executive functions for top-down control of prioritizing, organizing, planning ahead, delay of immediate gratification, then it needs to start with something that kids have buy-in to. So whatever it might be, rocketry, colors, patterns, sewing, finding that and showing the child what a variety of outcomes can be of someone who pursues this as a career or a hobby. And then if the child, I'd like to be able to do that, make that model plane or make that robot or make that pattern, then it takes somebody who's going to be there, helping them with the skills, but helping them see their daily progress to the goal. They're going to get the dopamine and feel, I can do it and I want to keep going.
Yes, I can see every child that had you as a teacher has benefited from that enthusiasm and deep understanding with a nurturing attitude. Let's talk about the attention in the classroom. In the digital age, every teacher and parent is struggling to help learners engage their attention and form strong memory for learning. What do you think of this problem, and what solutions do you suggest will work?
The brain has to care about paying attention, just like the video game and the buy-in. And what gets in, we have an attention filter, like reticular activating system, and it's programmed for which data to take in to become attended to. And there's millions of bits of data every second available, sending reports to this low brain. But continuously, the brain is getting messages from all the little nerves at the tip of your finger, hundreds of them in a square centimeter. So all these nerves from your special senses, from your body, are reporting their data continuously. So there's this attention filter, that is given a program, and you're born with it like animals in the wild. And ours is very similar. It has not evolutionarily adapted or increased. Pretty much the same as animals in the wild. It gives priority to information, all the data coming in, that's different, unexpected, a change in the pattern, and that's what it's programmed to do. So, no wonder if somebody's in a classroom and there's got a teacher speaking and same sitting arrangement and they're sitting the whole time. So, of course, when there's noise out in the playground or a fly comes in the room, that's a change, and that's where the attention will go. It's not because they all have ADD and something sparkling was thrown at them. The brain will go and prioritize new, different, curious. Now, we know it, so use it. To initiate attention with students, don't start with the usual lecture. Do something about the topic that will make them curious about what will follow, curious about why the color changed when a different dye was added, why they heard something seconds later than they saw it. Just a video of something that gets or a question. Why can't we fly? Whatever the subject is, a question or a curiosity engagement at the beginning, that's the buy-in they need. You want them to have such great curiosity that gets kind of squashed out of them because often in school, sorry, I know you're interested in that, but that's not where we're going now. Well, get them interested in something, and then they'll want to know what they have to learn, whether it's homework and helping students with that, but parents doing that or teachers. If a parent or teacher wants to build their effort, then get their attention by building their curiosity so that the attention filter will say, I want to know that information and let it in. Then, of course, there's the top-down executive functions that they can gradually build to control what gets in. Because as adults, we don't need bells and whistles or curious questions. We have the executive functions to make the attention filter let in things that are desirable for our achievement of the goals we want, not just survival or curiosity. But as kids are building their top-down attention control where they can say, okay, intake filter, I want that. While they're building it, we need to spur their interest with curiosity and change so that they'll be interested in the lesson that comes next.
So that's great. So when it's done well, there's definitely the teacher who is totally engaged in or prioritizes her class goal to engage the kids. But from your field work, what do you notice when it's not being done right? What are some of the best ways to give feedback to the teacher that they are delivering information in a boring or ineffective way?
Okay, certainly nobody, teacher or you or I, likes to receive blunt criticism. It always works if there is something that's important feedback that's corrective. We want to share that or receive it. We want to just receive that in a way, that sandwich model, first something positive, then the suggested or corrective feedback, and then something positive. So with students, I would use it, with parents, with teachers, with friends. I would say, let's try the teacher, though, where the child is bored. It would be, you are doing a great job. Johnny particularly likes, and you name something that the child likes other than recess. And then you say, I find it's hard to get kids, Johnny, interested and stay focused, but when he does something with us, he's so interested in boats and navigation that if he finds a way that it relates to that, he's really connected. Or my child is so interested in graphics or interested in art. So I find that with things you're learning at school, when I give him connections between the shapes that he's learning and the building of or designing of buildings, he gets really interested in learning why a triangle, how it works in area or how it works in volume. So now the parent is saying, here's the interest that my kid has that I've been able to find connect him to the things he's studying with you at school. Or here's some things that that's interesting in his past or his history that he loves about things he's done or places he's lived that really connect him because it's personalized. So what the parent's doing is saying, if you want my kid to engage, personal relevance is going to be their buy-in. The boredom won't be profound, and therefore they'll pay more attention and want to know what you have to teach if they engage from the beginning. So knowing the students, especially those that are not engaged, finding out that information from parents and using it is very powerful. And it's even better if a teacher knows that and says, I want all your kids to be interested and care about what they're learning. It's their education. It's not mine or yours. So you can help me do that for them by telling me what they're very interested in, excited about, things in their past that they really link to. And so their interests and also their strengths. When do you find they do their best? Doing something physically, when they're getting time to think about it. So asking parents and asking the teachers from the year before, passing along, that is a treasure chest for teachers and for parents. What gets their attention? What is their strength to get them engaged? That's much more important than test scores and punishments and behaviors.
I recently went to Texas during, the break, or one educator came to me and she said, because I have the same idea that I ask educators is to kind of really build a personal narrative, know more about the children that you're teaching. These are little mini, mini walking, talking, treasure chest, unlock it and see what's inside. And she said, I had this young 10th grader who was being very, very difficult to teach. Who would always be quiet. Never participate, never answer any questions. She would call on him and he would never respond. And then one day she was talking about this kid to another teacher and she said, oh, do you know his mother is, she's bilaterally deaf and he has grown up without anybody talking to him. So he's not used to, responding to oral commands. And so suddenly that background, simply that knowing that about that young man changed her approach and changed her attitude towards his quietness. So that's the kind of you're talking about, how to have the backdrop of individual story. That's very powerful.
Yes, well stated, because that information is not always passed down. You get test scores, and that's not the value.
So as we end, let's end with some amazing things that you always share, which is the practical classroom ready strategies. You call them no prep classroom ready interventions. So, and a lot of them have incredible and immediate application. You have been sprinkling this whole talk with those strategies, but there are some top of the mind strategies that maybe you can share before we end.
Sure. One of the things that I mentioned was that the brain is making predictions, getting feedback of the correctness, releases the dopamine response. For example, to relate to that yourself, think about if you are with a friend and you figuring out who starred in a movie that you're talking about. And sometimes it gets, I bet it was her. No, I think it was him. Then finding it out is kind of exciting. And when people watch basketball or football, if they have a little wager, few dollars on the winner, who's going to be the winner, they're much more attentive during the game. They don't even leave their seats as much during breaks. That's because once the brain buys in by making a prediction, the dopamine release system, which the brain wants, is sitting at the ready. All right. Come on. I want to know if I can get it, or if I got it right, then I'll get my dopamine reward. On that system for making a difference in the classroom can happen if every student has an individual response device. It could be a piece of paper. It could be like a little dry erase tablet with a dry pen. But anytime a question is asked, especially one to evoke curiosity or interest in the lesson, like how come humans can't fly, if we resort to the pick a stick and name a student, or whoever raises their hand and name that student answers, then the rest of the class, their brain says, forget it. I'm not going to get a reward. Because if someone answers right away, the brain of the person in the classroom says, okay, I was interested because I wanted my dopamine from making a prediction. But now I'm going to hear it before I even get to figure it out for myself. I'm going to hear this other person say it, and they're always right. And there's only one answer. So truly, the gift to give all students is let all of their brains buy in and care about giving them the time, the wait time to think about a response before anyone else gives one. And by writing it down on, say, a whiteboard, and after 30 seconds, you don't have anyone start holding it up right away. When they're ready, hold it up. Teacher sees it, no one else does, so there's no mistake here, and they got to make a prediction. So when the lesson unwinds, this is especially good, if you start with the question, why can't people fly? So at the beginning, they write down a prediction, no wings, or way too much. As they'll be told, they know that as the lesson goes on, they'll get to make more predictions, revise their predictions, add to it, and the lesson is going to be giving them information about flight, wings, gravity. So the lesson becomes something they really want because now they've bought in, they've made a bet, they've predicted it, and their brain is wired and firing to learn, and because they're going to get to change their prediction or strengthen it. So the quickest, most powerful thing I think is allowing all students to have an individual response device and time to predict, learn, and change their predictions.
I love that strategy because, as you mentioned, that we are so losing those kids who never get called upon. And of course, this way, it's also kind of circumventing the individual student's personality. So if I'm a shy person, I don't want to speak, but I can raise my board and write my prediction there. So I'm still being seen and heard. And that prediction is, again, as the teacher unveils the answer, he can compare his own response to the actual response and feel excited about that. Oh, I got it. Or, why did I not think it? So there's some kind of engagement which can lead to excitement. What I love about your message here is you're inviting all the educators to become and stay creative. Engaging children is a creative job, not a challenging job, the way I see it, actually. And so I, Judy, really appreciate your time and wonderful insights that you shared with all of us. And I will link up a lot of your tools and resources that you talk about and your website, which is very thorough. Any parting message for parents as we leave?
It's that truly parenting, teaching is harder than brain surgery. It's not brain surgery. It's harder. And their job is incredible because neurosurgery, when you're in my training, you do it so many times and you do such a small part, just observing for years and years. So by the time you're actually doing it, you have done so many at very easy and building up levels that it's not that challenging because you have one thing to focus on. When you're with your kids or in classroom, every minute, every change in the environment, who's there, what the task is, what you're saying is impacting their brains. And to stay on top of that, to notice that, whether you have 3 kids at once in your home or a classroom full of kids, the more you know neurology, neuroscience, that their brains are responding in different ways. Over time, hundreds of our 30 kids have gone through multiple emotional and cognitive states. And just to know that it's so hard to tune in and respond, you cannot do it to all those brains at one time. So recognize that is okay and pick one kid or one aspect of the child and build that confidence, build that recognition of effort to goal achievement with your child. And give yourself time to recognize the impact you had before you even start. Okay, I'm going to do this. What do I hope to get? What do I have to notice in my child? So when your child progresses, not only will they get the feedback, but you as a parent or teacher will say, I did it. Your dopamine will come out as a result of your achieving a challenge. And that will help you get to the next one.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the time we have today, but really appreciate you being here and sharing these amazing thoughts. And I bet the listeners will love it. Thank you, Judy.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Sucheta.
All right. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd sure appreciate it if you would kindly forward it to a friend or colleague who just might benefit. So, on behalf of our host, Sucheta Kamath, today's guest, Dr. Judy Willis, and all of us at Cerebral Matters, thanks for listening today, and we look forward to seeing you again right here next week on Full Prefrontal.
Thank you for listening to Full Prefrontal, exposing the mysteries of executive functions. To contact our host, Sucheta Kamath, and learn more about her work on improving executive functions, visit her website at cerebralmatters.com. That's cerebralmatters.com. Tune in next week for the next informative episode of Full Prefrontal.